Hey there. I'm going to put on my depth psychology hat for a minute and say something about introverts and extroverts. There's some misunderstandings about both. I want to talk about the shadow side of both, also the weak spot that each has, one of them. But before I go further, I want to mention Antonia here in TikTok has a whole series of videos on introversion and being an introvert. So I'll try to remember to tag her. I recommend them, they're great. And I think one of the strong points of many about her videos is that they talk a lot about being an introvert in an extroverted country, namely the US. And you see that sometimes. You see countries that favor a more extroverted style of interaction with people and more that are introverted. I notice that when I travel. So what are these terms? Carl Jung came up with them in the 1920s. He did a lot of research on typologies, and when he and Freud went their separate ways professionally, he got to wondering how much of this is temperament, how much of this is that we just didn't understand each other. So he investigated in quite a lot of detail. Psychological types is like this thick, different type systems, and then settled on introvert and extrovert as kind of the basics. It's more involved than that. But those are two of the key positions that he came up with. And one misconception I should mention right up front, although the way those two are described lends itself to this, introvert and extrovert, a misconception is that we're typing people, and Jung didn't intend for it to be used that way. He describes how they type psychologies that we tend to favor. So as an introvert, I favor that one. I was born that way. I grew up in a very extroverted, except for my dad, adoptive family. When I met my birth father, he was just as introverted as I am, and I was like, yeah, that's where I got it. So we tend to come in with this. I think there's some research evidence, it's been a while since I've looked at it, that there's some neurology involved and stuff like that. But what often happens is one or the other. So if you're an introvert, you tend to think extroverts are weird, unless you've done some homework on this. And when you're an extrovert, you think introverts are weird, that there's something wrong with us, that we're pathologically quiet. And so part of Jung's project was to say, no, we're just this way. We're just diverse this way, and we need to take that into account with each other. So introversion is often talked about as a kind of shyness or quietness, and that can be confusing right off the bat, because there are introverts who aren't shy. I'm not. I went through a brief period, I think it was like junior high and high school, where I went through adolescent shyness, but I've never been shy, but I am very introverted, which means there's a term that's floating around, social introvert, describes people like me. So I like to meet people. I like public presentations, doing them, and networking, and hanging out with friends and colleagues and things like that. But where the introversion comes in is I can only take so much. And I've stretched a bit over the years. You can practice this, because we all have both. You know, I have my extroverted side as well as my introverted side. And fortunately, I had a very extroverted mother, and that a little bit of that rubbed off. Otherwise, I'd just be lost in a library somewhere, and that would have been the end of me. Which there are worse places to get lost in, by the way. Support libraries. But in terms of capability, we have both. And one of the ideas that Jung had when he was formulating this is that we need to exercise both, even though we probably permanently will continue to like one or the other. So I'm more extroverted than I was in the past, but not that much. And I can go longer. I can go probably a full week of fairly extroverted activity, like when I'm at a conference interacting with people and showing up for events and stuff like that. And then I start to become irritable and a little dissociated, and then that's my signal for, okay, it's time to be off by myself for a few days. So introverts recharge by ourselves. We need our own quiet time. Everybody does, but the difference is that we need more of it, and we need it more sooner. So, and this also shows up in terms of a daily schedule. So like when I first wake up in the morning, even though I'm kind of a morning person in the sense of, I get up and I meditate and work and just, I'm pretty active when I first get up. But if I go walking somewhere, I don't want to talk to anybody. And so going to the grocery store is a challenge when I have this one very extroverted cashier who tends to be there when I'm there. And more about that in a minute. That was the interaction this morning that prompted this video, by the way. But so we're not all shy. There are shy extroverts. There are extroverts who have trouble with public speaking. I've taught some of them. Part of what I do is help people with that because I had a horrible problem with public speaking earlier in my life, and now I really enjoy it. So that's a misconception. I have a list over here. Let's see. Actually, I've mentioned most of them already. I'll do another video if more come to mind. But so it's not just about excessive quietness in the case of introverts or being noisy and loud in the case of extroverts. Those are stereotypes. It's that, here's a good way to do it. Jung talks about this. If suddenly you're thrust into a novel situation, is your instinct to immediately go out there and start exploring and looking around and finding things out? Or do you have a moment where you kind of pull back in yourself and go, what is this? So introverts tend to do that more. We tend to instinctively stop and go, and there's an inner process. What's going on? How does this involve me? And stuff like that. Extroverts tend to immediately launch out in the world and explore things. So there's a difference too. But keep in mind, these are not absolute opposites. And there's a term ambivert for people who are kind of in the center, which is a good place to be, where you can go back and forth between the two. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples of unconscious introversion and extroversion. In other words, when you tend to be kind of stuck in them because you haven't really done a lot of your own work, maybe. So I'll start with the introverts. We tend to see everything of value and meaning as being internal. And you hear comments a lot like meaning is within, the goal for everything is entirely internal. We do a lot of split or dualistic thinking where inner ends up being more valuable than outer. To find the answer to life, go within, right? That's a super introverted way of looking at the world. And here's a especially unconscious way of doing this is the fairly common thought that if everybody just did inner work or meditation or contemplation or whatever, it would magically change the world into something better, in spite of thousands of years of evidence to the contrary. We read the news. I mean, people have been meditating and contemplating since there were human beings. It's not making the world magically better. It improves the world. These are important disciplines to cultivate, but the idea that they're a panacea, that all you have to do is sit in your room and not go anywhere and not talk to anybody and just focus and you're uplifting the world, is an introverted fantasy. Likewise, to switch to the extroverts, the idea that it's all external, that we just need to make reforms and have laws and do this and do that, and it's without reflecting on anything, is an extroverted bias. And you can see how these two psychologies are very one-sided. They need each other. We need activists who reflect. We need meditators who are out in the world doing stuff, which, by the way, is a tradition in India. Some of their most famous gurus were very active in the world. Sri Aurobindo is an excellent example. So to integrate the two is a good thing. And so, and it also helps us get along just day to day. The cashier this morning was not taking any of my hints that I'm kind of tired today and I haven't had enough coffee and stuff. And she's like, coffee, I love coffee. What kind of coffee do you like? And so if we get how all this works, we can be a little bit more tuned into our audience, perhaps. So something to think about. Thanks.